On a freezing November morning in 1894, along the damp, soot-stained outskirts of Slough, a local day laborer stepped off the main gravel road and into a waking nightmare. Resting against the freezing bank of earth was the body of a local laundress. Her heavy woolen shawl was torn, her throat severed by a single, ruthless stroke of a blade, and her clothes soaked through with rain and blood. To the local constable who arrived on the scene, it bore all the hallmarks of a mindless, desperate mugging gone wrong. The murderer had vanished into the dense Thames Valley fog, leaving behind no witnesses, no weapon, and seemingly no physical trail. In 1894, the killer walked away from that lane convinced that the darkness had swallowed his secret whole. He believed that without an eyewitness to name him or a bloody knife in his pocket, the Victorian justice system was completely blind. He was wrong. Because resting directly beneath his heavy boots, deep within the mud he stood upon, was a microscopic paper trail. A silent witness underfoot that would spark one of the earliest forensic breakthroughs in British criminal history. If you are fascinated by global true crime told like a documentary, consider subscribing to EnterTheCrime. Because to understand how it got here, we have to go back. In the late 19th century, Slough was a town caught in the violent friction between two eras. Located roughly 20 miles west of central London, it was rapidly transforming from a quiet, sleepy staging town for horse-drawn coaches into a noisy, smoke-belching industrial hub. This boom was driven almost entirely by the rapid expansion of the Great Western Railway and the relentless growth of industrial brickworks. For the local working class, life was a daily battle for basic survival. Among the hardest working members of this community were the town's laundresses. These were women who spent grueling 14-hour days bent over steaming wooden tubs of boiling water and toxic lye, scrubbing, wringing, and ironing the heavy linens of wealthy London households and local country estates. It was bone-shattering, hand-blistered work. But for an independent woman navigating the financial insecurity of the Victorian era, it provided a rare measure of self-reliance. Among these tireless workers was our victim, a respected local laundress known across her neighborhood for her steady work ethic, quiet demeanor, and predictable routine. She was a woman who kept to herself, living a modest existence, balancing long, exhausting hours in the communal washhouses with quiet walks back to her modest cottage long after the sun had set. Then there was the man who would come to dominate the headlines, a local day laborer. To those who knew him around the brickworks and local farms, he was a transient figure, moving constantly from one physical job to another, surviving on seasonal labor and casual wage work. He was a man defined by a volatile temper and subtle psychological contradictions. While he could appear quiet and detached during his shifts, co-workers noted an underlying hostility, a dark edge that flared unpredictably whenever he frequented the crowded public houses along Slough's High Street. In the days leading up to that fateful November morning, subtle red flags began to register in the background of the victim's life. Neighbors later recalled seeing a tall, broad figure lingering near the perimeter of the washhouse path just as the evening shifts were ending. These interactions seemed minor at the time. A lingering look, an unprompted comment offered in the dark, a shadow stepping back into an alleyway when approached. These were early warning signs, small, creeping contradictions in a quiet neighborhood that signaled a dangerous fixation taking root in the darkness of Slough. The evening of November 14, 1894, began like any other night for the laundress. She finished her late shift at the washhouse around 9 p.m., wrapped her heavy wool shawl tightly against the biting winter dampness, and began her long walk home down a secluded, unlit lane. It was a route she had navigated hundreds of times without incident. But on this night, the laborer was waiting in the shadows behind a cluster of dense hedgerows. At approximately 9:30 p.m., the trap snapped shut. The attack was swift, calculated, and terrifyingly intense. The assailant stepped out from the darkness, blocking her path. A brief, frantic confrontation took place. The victim fought back, her instinct to survive evidenced by the trampled mud, crushed grass, and a dropped glass lantern that had shattered against a fence post. Her attacker dragged her violently off the main gravel track and down onto the soft, muddy slope of the drainage ditch beside the road. There, away from any potential passers-by, he drew a sharp blade. With a single, brutal motion, he severed her throat, ending her life in seconds. The motive appeared opportunistic, an attempted robbery or sudden escalation of a long-simmering obsession, but the violence was absolute. Satisfied that his victim was dead and could never speak, the murderer retreated into the pitch-black fields. He walked back toward his lodging house along indirect field paths, convinced that the fog, the rain, and the dark had rendered him completely invisible. When a passing farmer discovered the cold body at dawn, a wave of panic swept through Slough. This was not the sprawling, crime-ridden metropolis of London, where stories of Jack the Ripper still haunted the press. Slough was a close-knit industrial community where residents knew their neighbors. Local magistrates and police constables descended upon the murder site. They combed the surrounding bushes, interviewed nearby residents, and examined the victim's remains. Yet, the crime scene offered virtually nothing to the standard methods of the day. There was no murder weapon left behind, no dropped personal items, no eyewitnesses who had heard a cry in the dark. And that's when the real nightmare began. The initial phase of the investigation hit a wall almost immediately. Under intense pressure from local authorities and the public, detectives began detaining known vagrants, transient workers, and men seen traveling near the railway station on the night of the crime. Within 48 hours, local police announced they had detained a prime suspect, a traveling tinker found carrying a pocket knife in a nearby village. The local press jumped on the arrest, and for a brief moment, the town believed the killer had been caught. But the victory was short-lived. Detailed questioning and witness verifications proved the man was miles away in a lodging house at the time of the attack. He was released. The lead had completely evaporated, and public pressure was reaching a fever pitch. Investigating a capital crime in 1894 was a grueling, low-tech process. Detectives had to manually filter through massive mountains of handwritten alibis, local registry logs, tavern records, and witness letters, a process that modern investigators now perform with digital databases or secure network platforms in seconds. Realizing that standard interviews were yielding nothing, the lead detective on the case returned to the physical scene of the crime. He decided to abandon conventional assumptions and look directly at the earth beneath his feet. Near the drainage ditch where the victim was found, the ground possessed a highly unusual geology. It was not mere dirt. The site sat directly at the intersection of three distinct industrial and natural zones: wet Thames Valley clay, crushed coal dust blowing off the Great Western Railway tracks, and distinct red brick dust originating from the local kilns nearby. Preserved in a soft patch of this unique mud was a single, partial boot print, showing distinct nail patterns along the heel and a clear wear pattern along the outer edge of the sole. Armed with this detail, detectives turned their attention back to the local day laborer, who had been spotted near the lane roughly 30 minutes before the murder and whose alibi for the critical hour had completely collapsed under questioning. Detectives searched his room and seized his heavy work boots. The laborer was surprisingly calm. He even scoffed at the officers as they picked up his footwear. He had good reason to be confident. The laborer had taken meticulous care to scrub the leather uppers of his boots with hot water and tallow. There was not a single drop of blood visible on the surface. Visually, the boots appeared completely clean. To a standard 1890s police officer, this lack of visible blood would have meant the end of the line, a dead end that would force them to let him go. At this stage of the investigation, with no murder weapon and clean leather boots, who would you suspect? Do you think visual evidence alone would be enough to convince a jury in 1894? Let us know in the comments below. The investigators did not let him go. Instead, they took a bold step forward and handed the boots over to an early scientific analyst specializing in microscopic examination. While the upper leather of the boots had been thoroughly washed, the analyst looked where the suspect had forgotten to clean: the undersides. Using fine tools, the examiner scraped out the compressed soil that had been forced deep into the narrow crevices between the leather soles and the iron heel nails. When placed under magnification and subjected to chemical testing, the compressed dirt pulled from the suspect's boots matched the control samples taken from the crime scene down to the microscopic level. It contained the exact same balance of red brick dust, coal slag, and river clay, a specific geological footprint that existed nowhere else in the town except along that quiet, fatal stretch of lane. To understand why the perpetrator believed he was entirely safe, we must analyze his mindset through the lens of late 19th century criminal behavior. The laborer operated under a classic cognitive bias of his era, the belief that physical guilt required obvious physical evidence. In 1894, the average person understood forensics through dramatic, visible markers: a blood-soaked coat, a forgotten weapon, or a victim's stolen jewelry found in a pocket. He had spent hours after the murder scrubbing the tops of his boots, washing his hands, and carefully wiping his jacket. In his mind, because the uppers were clean, the crime had been erased. He was utterly blind to the idea that invisible, microscopic evidence could speak just as loudly as a bloodstain. But while investigators analyzed his physical movements, a hidden piece of evidence was about to surface that changed everything. When the scientific examiner pushed his analysis even further into the soil layers scraped from the deepest grooves of the boot's heel, he made a staggering discovery. Embedded within the dried crust of clay and brick dust were tiny, torn strands of dark, dyed wool fibers. The analyst compared these fibers directly against threads taken from the victim's torn apron. Under the microscope, the fiber diameter, dye composition, and wear pattern matched perfectly. This single discovery completely reconstructed the physics of the crime. It proved that the killer hadn't merely walked down the public road nearby. He had stepped directly onto the victim's clothing during the struggle, driving her apron fibers deep into the mud of his boot sole with the full force of his body weight. His own violent action had locked the evidence permanently beneath his feet. The victim's tragedy was compounded by the systemic reality of her environment. Her vulnerability was not just her route, but the total absence of municipal lighting along working-class thoroughfares, a dangerous infrastructure gap in expanding Victorian towns that violent predators routinely exploited under cover of night. The trial took place at the regional Assize court, attracting vast crowds of locals and press reporters from across Berkshire and London. The prosecution presented what was then considered groundbreaking, high-risk evidence. Rather than relying solely on witness character statements, the prosecutors brought the forensic examiner to the stand. He displayed side-by-side geological charts, fiber analysis under magnification, and the physical boots themselves, showing the jury precisely how the earth beneath the suspect's feet tied him irreversibly to the murder scene. The defense attempted to dismiss the science as modern mumbo-jumbo, arguing that dirt was simply dirt and that no man should hang based on microscopic dust. But the precision of the scientific alignment was impossible to ignore. After a brief deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty. The judge sentenced the laborer to death by hanging, bringing a decisive and dramatic conclusion to a case that had paralyzed the town with fear. The Slough Laundress murder of 1894 remains a pivotal moment in the evolution of forensic science. Decades before modern DNA testing or digital tracking existed, this case proved to law enforcement worldwide that a criminal can never truly leave a scene without taking a piece of it with him. It served as a real-world validation of what scientists would later formalize as Locard's exchange principle. Every contact leaves a trace. The killer believed the darkness of Slough would cover his steps forever. He never realized that the very ground he walked upon would rise up to speak for the woman he silenced.
Thank you for watching Enter the Crime.
If you found this breakdown insightful, hit the like button and subscribe for deeper dives into the forgotten historical cases that shaped modern justice.